let me introduce to you Charity Becker. So Charity is one of the newer members of the IECL faculty, but she is definitely not new to the coaching industry. She's worked in organisations, she's worked for organisations, a passionate advocate of supervision and ethics. She is experienced and brings deep expertise in the coaching and brings a really refreshing, no-nonsense approach to coaching. And one of my favourite quotes of Charity was years ago. She goes, you know, with my coaching, what I'm really trying to do is just help leaders be less crap. And I thought, fantastic. If we can do that, then the world will be a better place. But let me hand over to Charity. Over to you. Look forward to the presentation.
Thank you. I think I always panic a little bit when someone says that they're going to quote me. That seemed okay. I'm glad some of you enjoyed the Disney. I was hesitant about putting it in there, but it seems to have gone down okay. So that's one of my outside of IECL obsessions. So this session, we've got an hour together in a moment to introduce you to James Kelly, who you can see on your screens, and we're going to have a conversation around how to make what happens in coaching or what happens in learning or what happens in coach training translate into action outside of the workshop, how to make the work after the workshop. And James is one of the three partners of an organisation that we have partnered with called qChange. And we're working now to try and build the link between the human magic that happens in coaching that most of you will have had some experience about and technologies, that they don't pull apart from each other, but actually enhance each other. So James, if you would like to come on, say hello. Welcome.
No,
I'm so glad you're here.
I refuse. So first of all, I'm just waiting for Disney to get a hold of you for royalty and infringement rights for that music that was played to 100 people. Hello, everyone. I am James Kelly. And thank you, everyone. It's so weird. The screen's focused on me and I hate it. So I'm gonna have to get rid of myself. But I want to say thank you to everyone for having me here. Thank you, Charity, IECL, Gab, everybody else. We're really excited as an organization, as a early stage startup, to find ideal partners that get it, that understand what we're trying to do. So Charity, you're the driver of this bus, this magical, invisible bus. So you tell me where you want to go, what you want me to talk about. Yeah. And if I could, whoever's in the background, if I can share my screen at some point, that would be great as well.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start like way out of what I would usually do and just ask you a heap of open questions, James, because I'm a coach at heart. So I want to lead with that. But could we start with your story? You know, where are you to start off with? Where are you and how did you get here?
Yeah. Well, back in 1973, my mom, oh, sorry, you're not that far. So the reality is that how I got here is a very long journey. So not to bore your audience completely, but I was in Australia for 4 years, which is how kind of the Australian connection happened. I received my PhD at the University of Western Australia. So I have a PhD in consumer psychology. So a little bit different than IO psychology, which is typically the practitioner that comes into the coaching world or the organizational world. I spent 12 years in higher ed teaching marketing strategy, but along that journey, I've always been passionate about how, you know, to really what John said earlier, how it could be a less sucky leader, or less crappy leader. And so throughout this journey, in 2015, I started a podcast, and this podcast was a 3-year podcast, and it was called Executive After Hours. And the focus of the podcast was all around a leader's journey from childhood to adulthood. And the tagline was, I care about who you are, not what you do, because who you are will define what you do. And so for me, it was like being an armchair psychologist. And so these 120 plus interviews I did were with executives from as high as Google all the way down to entrepreneurs and everything in between. And so that part of the journey was kind of the first, I guess, bounce in the springboard into qChange. when I concluded this podcast in 2018, I was living in Dubai or just outside Dubai with my family of four kids. And so we were living outside Dubai, and I wrote a book. And so that book was called The Crucible's Gift: 5 Lessons from Authentic Leaders That Thrive in Adversity. A mouthful. Don't do it with marbles. It would be confusing. But the book was really predicated on the notion of how do you turn adversity, or how do you become an authentic leader, and the role that adversity plays in that process. And so the real crux of it is that a leader becomes more authentic when they take their adversity moments, good and bad, take those adversity moments and drive their self-awareness. And through that self-awareness, being driven to be more self-aware, they end up developing more of compassion, more integrity, more desire for relationships. But then the big kind of like aha of all of this is that it only works when a leader has a growth mindset. Without any of that, you're stuck in the past. You're stuck in what was the worst of whatever situation it is. And so the book is based on a number of theories, which kind of lead to what we do at qChange. And that gets you up to date. So qChange was launched in 2019. And today, where I am today, is no longer in the Middle East. I'm now living with my family in Bend, Oregon. So if anyone's been to Bend, Oregon, it's a beautiful piece of world in the US that I think The Economist recently named one of the top destinations in the world from an outdoor perspective and lifestyle perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to let everybody here listening and anybody listening to the recording how completely obsessed I am with this qChange idea. So this is one of the things that has plagued me in the now 15 years that I have been either teaching coaching skills to leaders or coaching leaders, is what happens after you leave the room. I'm sure all of you have either participated in a workshop or run a workshop, and it's great, right? You get this, it's like a big high five at the end of it and everyone's enthusiastic, and you just know that 20 minutes later, they're going to be sucked into the vortex of the emails that have built up over the day and all of the messages, and everything just kind of just disappears. And I know this even for me, and I do it for a living. I find it very hard to remember the things that I've said that I'll remember, and pay attention to the things. James, when you use the self-awareness phrase, I cringe a little bit because I rely on other people for my self-awareness. It's not a strength of mine. I'm good at taking feedback, but self-awareness isn't one of my things. And so this technology that James and his partners have created, that IECL is so enthusiastic about, is a way of marrying what happens in the space, in the learning space, in the coaching relationship, in the learning relationship, with what happens outside. And James, I want you to talk about it in whatever way because you know it inside out more than I do. And let me know when you want to share. So
yeah. Well, we have an hour, Charity. So I don't know if we got. I can go slow as a snail. So okay. The reality, and I want to dovetail on kind of what you just talked about, that disconnect of the moment to the experience.
Yeah.
And whether you see it in coaching, I saw it in higher ed. And if you reflect on your own learning and your own development over time, the science is really clear when you look at Bloom's taxonomy of learning, right? At the very bottom is the classroom experience. It's the community experience. And around the bottom, they suggest, give or take, within 10 days, you only retain about 10%. So think about that. Think about your organizations or your clients and the dollars they're investing to be a better version of themselves, because it's important. And the content that IECL gives is important. It's science-backed. But the disconnect is, what do you do in the moment? And so when you take Bloom's taxonomy and you go to the very top, when you want to retain 90% of that, you have to be able to teach somebody else, which is why the coaches in IECL are great. They can teach this content to other people. But one level below that is experiences. When you can experience something, your retention rate after 10 days is roughly 70%. Now, that's not me talking, that's the science talking. And what's amazing about that is if you break down the neurology about it all, and you break down what an experience really is, an experience is an emotion. It's a neuron firing in your brain to create a memory of a moment that will last longer. And so when we designed our solution, we thought about the notion of what role does an experience play in someone's learning? I can't speak for anybody here, but for me, my biggest memories of growth are when I'm experiencing something. I love to travel. That's my experience. I don't take photographs. I should, because I've had a bad memory, but from traveling, I create these experiences. And these experiences are what are critical to my growth, to my openness, to my self-awareness. And so, Charity, my conversation about self-awareness, and you're like, I suck at self-awareness. But my guess is that if you have an experience where there's a behavioral tension, ideal self and actual self, you're going to grow in your self-awareness. And so I just want to kind of start with that whole premise of the software, is that we're really about driving experiences through a number of different technological mechanisms, if you will.
Beautiful.
I can keep going, but I want to give you space to ask questions.
I've just made a link to what you said about the experiences. I would say that feedback for me is one of my experiences. So the self-awareness comes in the moment where someone, and let me be really clear, it's usually somebody that I reside in my house with, says something like, have you eaten anything today? Or do you need a coffee? And so in that moment, I can see that there is a gap between my ideal self and my actual self. Usually it's not a pretty gap either. But yeah, you've just reframed what I've been talking about feedback for. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So how do you do this thing that you are speaking about?
Yeah.
How are you creating experiences for leaders after their learning?
So I know that this audience is going to be, I'm assuming, because they want to be coaches or they come from an organization that's really curious about the coaching framework. So if you're okay, Charity, I'd love to kind of throw some more science on what we've designed before I kind of dive into the whole process. So when you look at my background and my research and what I've done in the past, I did a lot of stuff around community, how you drive intrinsic motivation around community. And I did work around nudges or behavior change. And my best way to explain why our solution works is to think about the grocery store when you're at the checkout counter and you buy that fair trade chocolate that's sitting there right in front of you. And it's the timing of where that is placed to the moment of when you are doing something that is one of those priming effects that gets you to do that behavior they want you to do. Now, in this example of chocolates, it could be the fact that you're driven by ethics and ethical purchasing. It could be that you just like the color of the wrapper and the packaging. There's a number of triggers psychologically that gets an individual to buy or consume something in the moment. So when we designed this, or the framework of this, it wasn't just me. So I also want to be clear that there are two other business partners. One is Rob Buckingham, who spent nearly 20 years at Intel, designing almost every internal product in Intel. And he left Intel actually as chief of staff of the chief diversity officer at a, I don't know how billion-dollar company that is, but I think it's a Fortune 50 company. The other co-founder, which is really, really helpful, and from what I'm going to talk about from a behavioral standpoint, is Dr. John Howes. He's an IO psychologist, and he spent the last 20 plus years at Nike, Honeywell, Allied Signal, Sprint, all around their employee experience or leadership development. And so we have these three diverse perspectives and experiences kind of coming together. So going back to the nudge example, what we know from theory, if you look at BJ Fogg, Tiny Habits, or you look at Richard Thaler and his colleagues around nudge theory, all of it is predicated in the notion of priming or notifications. Now, there are other solutions out there that talk about priming or notifications or nudges. The big difference that we have is that I'm a big believer that if you want someone to do something, you need to prime them or nudge them immediately before that desired behavior. So all of our nudges are tethered to a meeting, not any meeting. It's a meeting that we've recognized or identified that is ideal for the behaviors that you're working on. And that's kind of our secret sauce and our algorithms in the back end. So that's the first part of the science, is delivering nudges that matter the most when you need to practice something at the right time. So that's the first part. That's really important. This is the first part of the experience: presence, centering. This is what we get from our users, from the nudges. Now, what's key about this is that these nudges only happen about twice a day, depending on your schedule. We don't want to flood, because then there's also fatigue. So the other part of science is, how do you minimize fatigue and maximize impact? So kind of moving forward, as our solution works from a science perspective, I already talked about Bloom's taxonomy, and that's all predicated on creating experiences. So the nudge is the first part of the experience, but then we have a feedback loop in the back. So as I walk through this example, and I'll walk you guys through a demo here shortly, if you're a little bit lost here, just kind of hold on, because it will all make sense once I actually show the solution and what it looks like. But after a meeting that's targeted for a particular behavior you want to work on. So in the example you're going to see in a little bit here, it's around strategic thinking. So after the meeting, I'm simply asked as a user, as a leader, and by the way, we think anyone can be a leader. It doesn't have to be the designated title. And in fact, we use the term leadership ability, not leader ability. But after the meeting, a simple question is asked to you. Were you a strategic thinker in this meeting on a scale of 1 to 5? Very simple. This is your perception of self, right? This is your ideal self moment. But here's where it gets really interesting. When you onboard our solution, we basically do a brief scan of your calendar, and all we look for is subject line and who's in your meetings. And we make recommendations to you on who you would like to help you grow. Above you, horizontal to you, direct reports. Think of kind of a rolling 360, if you will. And so if those individuals are in this particular targeted meeting, they're asked, did you see James act strategically on a scale of 1 to 5? And so in real time, I'm receiving what we call a leader team perception gap card, where I'm going ideal self, actual self. And this is where there's a gap analysis happening. So I can't remember what I gave myself for the score earlier. I think it was a 4. And you'll see that my team gave me an average score of 2.5. So here's my self-awareness moment that I have as an individual. So feedback is critical to get it closest to the moment of the behavior you tried to practice. Often feedback is given out of context, latent, and way after the moment. So we sandwich that through our methodology to really right around the moments that matter most for the team and for the user or leader. The final thing of our solution, which is really interesting, and I think is actually the most important part of our solution, is what we call the cycle of giving. So I don't think that an organization and team function if it's leader first, leader develop, leader, leader, leader. I think a team works best when it's collaboration through leadership. And so when an individual in this example gets an aggregated anonymous score from their team, I can either stop, be super content because yep, I didn't show up, or I have the opportunity to start a cycle of giving, which is asking for written feedback. And we ask 3 simple questions. What was the situation you saw the behavior? What were the actions the leader did? And what was the impact on you? Mm-hmm. All of this gets gathered up anonymously again, delivered back to you. And this is the last part, which I think is the most important. I often joke when I'm on podcasts or even this event, I'll do it here. We're all 9-year-old kids at heart. We just want to be heard. That's it. We just want to be heard. And so by giving those around the leader their ability to give feedback on particular specific moments of behavior, I, the leader, then can read these moments and give this individual who I don't know gratitude right back. And so there's this cycle of appreciation, the cycle of good feedback, the cycle of being heard, and the cycle of gratitude. And when you look at the research, gratitude is a very significant part of employee engagement, huge part. And so that's kind of the cycle in itself that results in a score and a nice little pretty dashboard I'll show you guys. But all of this is based on 2 major things. 1, 45 different behavioral areas, from strategic thinking, communication, being authentic, DE&I. We have 14 areas specific to that. And number 2, today, it's all embedded inside Microsoft Teams. So if you're at a larger organization that uses Teams, it's how you're collaborating all day long, every day already. And so it's efficient and effective. And as we like to say, high impact, low friction. Okay, I'll take a breath there, Charity. I don't know if there's any questions in that.
You take a breath. That's right. Actually, why doesn't everybody take a breath? We know that this is something that we don't tend to do as well. So we'll let everyone just deep breath in, breathe some oxygen into your lungs. Deep breath out, drop your shoulders if they're moving towards your ears, relax your jaw, that's it, beautiful. James, the 45 behavioural things, how did you come up with strategic thinking and all of those? Where did they come from?
Yes, I'm going to quickly share my screen so you can just take a look at all of them too.
Awesome.
They might be a little on the small side, so I apologize. But that's all of them. So all of these came through John, from John and John's background, and him looking at over 100 different studies, between studies or looking at 360s or looking at assessments, and kind of coming up with, the bell of the ball of options. And we're always evaluating and deciding what stays, what goes. But what we want to have is a set of behaviors that goes with a particular user through the lifetime of their journey. In organizations, it's not static, it's dynamic. This notion of the whole system, which was brought up earlier, is really, really important. The whole system is really an organism. And where you start an organization will not be where you finish. And who's on your team today will not be on who's your team tomorrow. And if you're a company A today, you might be a company B tomorrow. All that context and whole system changes. And so we wanted to create a robust set of behavioral areas that lead up to 10 dimensions and then 3 themes overall. But this is basically 100 different sources, if you will.
Awesome. And just for those of you listening, one of the just checking that I'm still with you. Can you hear me? Yep.
You're back.
So these have all been mapped to our applied coaching modules. So every single one of these behavioral, what's the word you use for them, James?
Areas.
Behavioral areas, thank you, have been linked to coaching behaviors or leader as coaching behaviors. So we've got in our applied coaching modules, which is why I'm so obsessed with this, we've built it in so that if you are doing, for example, the coach's mindset as one of our applied coaching modules, you can link the areas that qChange has and start to get feedback on what it is you're working on. So if you think about the amount of times that leaders have intended to ask more open questions, you can map James's areas to that behavior and start to get feedback in your meetings on those coach-like behaviors or leader as coach behaviors or coaching behaviors, depending on what it is that you're trying to learn. And it bridges the gap between the conversation we have in a space like this and what happens when you go back into meetings and you're stressed and running late and there's a million things on your to-do list and you've completely forgotten that you were going to ask open questions and you've reverted entirely back into barking orders at people. Again, I'm using myself as an example. Yeah. So what questions do people have before we get the demo? Because this is the bit that I'm most excited about, is seeing how it works, showing you all how it works.
As we're waiting for questions, just a couple questions we always get. So I feel I just address them now really quick. Yeah. One question we get is around anonymity when there's less than one person or 2 people in the meeting, right? Because you, by sheer numbers, could probably figure out who did what. So our solution is designed so that there needs to be at least 3 or more what we call influencers in the meeting for you to be able to get written feedback or quantitative feedback. Now, what that might mean, it could be Charity and I doing a one-on-one, and I also get nudged, and Charity can still give me quantitative feedback, but I don't see it. It rolls up to the end of week score. So it's added to the calculations. And again, we take anonymity really seriously. And so we want to make sure that that is built into the framework of the solution or software.
Awesome.
That's the major one.
Yeah. How to keep people feeling safe, right?
Yeah. Psychological safety is huge.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, there's nothing coming through on the chat. No, there'll be more after the demo, I'm sure of it. Let's have
that, or I'm so amazing at explaining, Charity, that I've left no questions on the table. I'm going to go with the self-confidence one and say, let's go with
the second one for sure.
Yeah. So, all right, well, let me do this. If there's no questions, and Charity, please feel free to interrupt anything that comes to your mind.
Yeah, I'm going to. You don't have to ask me twice. You know.
What? All right, sorry. All right, here we go. Please let me know, Charity, when you can see my screen. Oh, did we lose Charity?
Yeah, we can see your screen, James.
Yeah, it's showing
Okay.
Up.
Okay. Okay. So the first thing you're going to notice is that it just sits right here in the chats, right? So it's all just in the flow of work. But what I want you to pay attention to is this, what we call our intelligent chatbot. And so right here, earlier today at 4:27, I asked for a nudge. I didn't ask for a nudge. I had a meeting. The calendar recognized the meeting, and I'm working on the notion of big picture thinking. So I was sent this nudge immediately before the meeting. Ask your team, what is the real opportunity for us as a team? So leveling up from the moment to the bigger idea, right? So often when you go to a strategic meeting, people get stuck into the nuances, the details. Those can always be hammered out later. And so when you're trying to coach the team to be a bit bigger in their thinking, a bit more leveled up, if you will, which by the way, I hate that phrase, but to be thinking bigger than the moment, this is the nudge I got. So immediately after the meeting, I got sent this card that said, I did well demonstrating big picture thinking in the meeting. It's a simple one sentence question. It's almost like a yes or no, but we want to obviously have some sort of variance in the data. So we ask a 1 out of 5 question. Sorry, 1 out of 5 scale. So I gave myself a 4. You can see the subject line, time, and then my team was asked the same question. And the card comes back like this. This is the leader team perception gap card. So again, it attaches the nudge, the meeting subject, the time, the average influencer rating, 2.67. I did not crush it, to say lightly, but this is that behavioral tension. You know, when I was teaching over the last 12 years, I taught a ton of consumer behavior. And one of the things we talk about in a consumer behavior standpoint, which consumer psychology comes right out of normal psychology, behavioral psychology. One of the things we talk about is often we buy how we see ourselves, but it doesn't match our actual self. Or more importantly, talk about need transformation. When there's a need is when there's a gap between ideal and actual. And so in this case, if this gap, negative 1.33 is big enough, I feel compelled to understand why. If I care enough about my development, if I care enough about my team, if I want to be better as a leader, as a human being, if you will, if I want to construct a better narrative through the words and world that we live in, based on what I was listening to earlier, then this should be a tension point for me behaviorally. Again, happening in the flow. What you'll also notice is this thing called qInsights. It's right there on the bottom here. And these qInsights are thought joggers. Now, there's a lot of opportunity with some partners where we can deliver for IECL and their clients their actual content here. So if they have all this leadership content that usually gets lost in the LMS systems, we can chunk that up or break it into pieces to match the areas to the content they have, give little snippets and a link out to their LMS system so that the utilization goes up. That is huge value for organizations who spend a lot of money on LMS systems and get very little utilization from those systems. So I said, okay, great. I want to get some written feedback. So it sent off a message to the team and it said, hey, I want to get some written feedback. And it came back as situation, action, impact. Now I want to have full transparency here. We're actually in the process of testing out another form of this. That is just 2 questions. What was the impact on the behavior on you? And feed forward. What would you like to see different, new, or more of? Right? And that second question is really important from an action perspective, right? Getting the action of what others perceive the desired behavior allows the leader to be open to the other opportunities to act and be different in the moment. And so we're moving towards that model as a more simplistic model, but I think a much more impactful and meaningful set of data, if you will, for the leader. So I asked this question, I say, okay, great, observation 1, I really like it. Thanks. And I look at what the feedback they gave me and I try to find the right piece of gratitude. So this one I'll say thanks, and I'll hit send. It's going to figure out in the back end who actually sent this so it can deliver them a card. And what you notice is the say thank you button leaves. So then you know exactly who you gave the thank you to. Well, you don't know, but you know which set of feedback you gave thank you to, and it's off the table. So this is great. And you know, there's a lot of noise here. So what we designed was this dashboard. And this dashboard sits right here inside Microsoft Teams. And what you're looking at here is my leader score, which is actually embarrassing to say this to a bunch of coaches right now, by the way. I'm clearly failing somewhere along the way. And compared to other leaders using this solution. So another question we get often is, okay, is it for everybody or the organization this is in? It depends on how the software was purchased or how we partnered with IECL. So there's a way what we would say is behind the firewall and to the, I guess you would say public, which isn't the right term, but kind of everybody in the ecosystem. So some financial institutions that we're working with want to place this behind the firewall for security. Super easy to install. It's 5 clicks for IT, and it's available to everybody inside that institution behind the firewall. The other thing you see here is the trends over time. So this score is updated once a week. This score is in the flow, but more importantly is all the data down here. All of this is real time. All of this happens every single cycle that I get quantitative feedback. And what you can see here is I can look at my rating versus my influencers, what they're giving me. I can look at my negative gap, which is below 0, and my positive gap. So Charity, can you see this okay? I can make it a little bit bigger.
Yeah, no, it's
okay.
awesome.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So what's really important about this is that it's an instant visual snapshot. Think about human psychology. We are visual beings first. So we will make sense of a graph really quick. And so when we look at this, any of the gray above 0 means that I gave myself a score less than my team, which means I need to work on my self-confidence, or I'm showing up better than I thought. You can expect a good leader to always be slightly less than their team. That's what we tend to see. Now, what you can see down here is that I overstated my value, and this is a negative consequence. I wouldn't say, but a negative insight, if you will, in the moment. Now, finally, all of the data, self-rating, average rating, perception gap, the area you're working on, the Q insight, the feedback is all here. Now, I want you to imagine you're an IECL coach, or you have an IECL coach in your organization, or you've partnered with IECL to run a massive coaching exercise at your organization. Imagine the coaches that you've hired to help your leaders and teams be better, having this data to have richer, more meaningful conversations with their clients or partners. Because often what happens, at least what we have seen, and Charity, I'd love to get your voice into this, is that between coaching sessions, you don't really know if they're working on it. You hope they're working on it. And when they come back to you and you ask them, how did it go? It's good, it's great, or I'm struggling.
Yeah.
But there's no like historical data that you can pull apart and say, well, tell me about this feedback here. How accurate is that? What's your interpretation? How would you have done it differently, better than, or the same as? And so this data and this richness of it allows to have deeper, better conversations between coaching sessions, between facilitations, even if it's a group facilitation. And so this is the power with this partnership between IECL and qChange, is the richness of data that you have as a user, as a coach, and as an organization.
This is what I've been geeking out about since I did. But this is, and again, I feel this will be familiar to some of you. But you'd like to have a on your shirt reminding you. It's so easy to forget. So you, after a workshop or after a coaching session, how do you both keep it alive? But also that gap that James is talking about between self-perception and actual impact. And often really good leaders do greatly underestimate what they're doing. The bit that I love about this is that you've got an insight around how you can bridge that gap. What is something you can do? Where is the action here? And I think this is going to revolutionize the way that learning, whether it's learning from a one-on-one coaching session or whether it's learning from coach training sessions, actually becomes embedded, actually becomes applied, because we're talking about applied coaching, into people's day-to-day worlds where it doesn't sit separately in a learning bubble or in a coaching bubble, but the translation from those conversations is threaded through people's everyday lives. They can begin to see where the themes are. I can imagine, James, if I was looking at that gap for me It would vary depending on what time of the meetings they were. In the mornings, I'd be doing quite well. In the afternoons, it would drop, and I could make a decision about changing the times of my important meetings.
Well, and I even take a step. One of the things we're working on, we're just trying to find a way to deliver the data that's safe. Is how do you show up on one-on-one or one-on-two meetings versus team meetings? Like I show up very differently, and I don't want to say I'm the polar opposite of you, Charity, but I have a very high self-awareness. I spent a lot of alone time as a child. So I just grew up watching adults all the time. And so for me, I recognize that how I show up as a one-on-one is totally different than our team meetings. That's a really important data point, because your most influence is in a one-on-one or one-on-two meeting more than on one in 10, whatever it is.
It's also a lot of the conversations that I've had over the years when I've been coaching leaders is that the feedback from, say, their peers will be that they're warm and they're engaging and they're very connected. But the feedback from their direct reports will be that they're distant or they're directive. And to be able to see, well, hang on, you're doing this, you're doing it here. What's going on over here? How is it? You've already got the behaviors with this cohort. Why, what's happening that's shifting it? And this data would be able to bring that up too, because you can see what's happening from around them. So take me through. You go. No,
I'm looking at the questions and I'm thinking, oh boy, okay. We got a lot of questions here. Oh, Andy's in here. Wait, is Andy Johnson on this call? If Andy's here. Yeah. I am leaving this call if Andy Johnson is here.
He's being uncharacteristically quiet and helpful, so we'll let him stay.
Yeah, all right.
Take me through. So if I've just come out of an amazing IECL applied coaching workshop, and what I need to work on is, let's really stretch the imagination here, listening better and not interrupting people so much, which absolutely would be what I would have to be working on. What do I do? What happens next?
Well, I mean, in concert with you and your team at IECL, the first stop will always be for us IT. Yeah. IT is always the first stop. The strength of our solution is because we're embedded inside Microsoft Teams. It really allows us to not skirt any tech IT security issues, but it gives a blanket of security that we're in an ecosystem. So that's the first thing. And because the ease of installation, excuse me, is literally 5 clicks for IT. It's very different than a traditional integration that you would have with another organization where you have to write an API and there's a lot of heavy lifting. This is simply an app that resides inside an ecosystem. So the first thing we would do is have to talk to IT. Now, depending on the structure of IT, that could be a week, that could be 2 weeks. We've seen both, and we've seen longer. So that's usually the first step for us. Beyond that, it's working with you all at IECL to figure out when's the launch date, how many leaders, right? What's the best form of communication? How can we empower you guys for success and your partners for success as well? I mean, it's not complex. It's a program that's attached to a program that you guys are doing. We see our solution best when we are tethered with a coaching program, a leadership program as part of it. Yeah. And the reason why we think it's so impactful that way is, and I said this a little bit earlier, organizations spend a lot of money. There's $74 billion a year spent on some sort of leadership development globally. But the retention rate, as I said earlier, is only about 10 to 15%. So the value that IECL brings is tremendous. So let's bring that to life. Yeah. Let's embed this with it. So when they say go, it's just IT and working with you and your liaison at the organization, picking a launch date and working backwards. Awesome. I may have oversimplified that by far, by the way.
That's right. Why Teams? Why MS Teams?
So great question. And the biggest reason is that Microsoft Teams today has 230 million active users daily. We will be in Slack, we will be in G Suite, but that's just a very big market. And most Fortune 5,000, Fortune 10,000 companies are in Microsoft Teams, roughly 70 to 80%. So it just made sense from us strategically to be there.
Okay, perfect. And so I want to say to everybody listening that this is something that we are more and more serious about embedding into any learning intervention that we do. So we initially thought, this is great for embedding at the end after you've done the learning. We're starting to offer it and recommend that our clients use this beginning, during, and after they've had anything to do with us, so that they can get a much stronger return on investment. James, how long do you recommend people stay on the qChange journey after or during a learning intervention?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm trying to pick the most appropriate answer. And the reason is that my favorite answer to everything is it just depends.
Yeah.
Right. So, one of the things that we know is that when it's tethered to a 3-month program, we know there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. That also lets the user know there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. A lot of times software like ours, where it falls short, is really around the novelty of it and just general fatigue. And so some of the things that we are developing in the background are in weeks 10, 11, 12, hey, do you want to pause and go test this in the wild? Right? No nudges, no feedback, but we're going to ask your team in 2 weeks, are you seeing this behavior consistently? Right? This is a way to say, we're going to make you go do this, and then we're going to keep you accountable for this. The other thing that we have in the background that we're developing, again, all this stuff is like coming really, really fast, is, hey, it's 10 weeks. We notice your gap is closed. You're consistently scoring 3.7s, or 4s, and your team's giving you a 4.2. Why don't you do this next? Right? You're at this position in the organization. Typically, individuals at this level work on this set of skills, this set of soft skills or power skills. How about this next in your journey? So being proactive to that, things like that. So my question, the short today, the best, I think, use case, if I'm being totally transparent, is around the notion of being tethered to a program that is 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, whatever the program is, because there's actionable measurement from the beginning to the end. You can look at the benchmarking, and then you can take a pause, come back half a year later, come back 3 months later, come back a month later. It's super easy inside Microsoft Teams.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to open, because we've got you here, and you've zoomed in from, well, the other side of the world from me, not from everybody. I know you're missing water polo, your daughter's water polo, to be here, but I want to.
She's back now.
Oh, she's
back
done
now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to open the floor to questions for anybody that is curious. We want to know while we've got James here, what it is that you would like to ask about this whole process, and then I'm sure I'll have some more too for you in just a moment, James.
I can also go.
We're a quiet group.
Yeah, John, I don't know if you've seen any of the questions come through in the chat. If there's anything specific that really flagged for you.
Yeah, look, there's a couple of questions that I noticed. There was one from Singapore here, so a government agency, and just the whole security. They use Microsoft Teams, but there's a firewall even to the internet, kind of around the organisation. So how might it work in? And I guess many government agencies are very, very similar. But how would it work in that kind of highly secure environment?
Yeah. So this most likely would be a case where we would basically give them a zip file, and they would just upload the zip file behind their firewall to maintain that level of security. And it's that simple. Otherwise, we have certifications that show the level of security that we have as well. So there's a number of different ways. We worked with the Australian government for a pilot. We got through their security. Singapore might be more stringent, but at the end of the day, we know that there'll be instances that they'll want a zip file to control the information flow in and out of the organization. It's a very simple process to do that.
Okay, good. There's another question here from Haley Novus around, do the nudges result in survey fatigue?
Yeah, I saw, actually, that's the one I have up on my screen right now, John. I was like, okay, right. I want to answer that question right there.
Now's your chance.
So I think Andy mentioned it in one way, but there's really two sides of the solution. I think of our solution as a two-sided economy. You got the leader side, but you have the influencer side. And without one, you don't have the other. And so one of the design features that we have is that the nudges are only twice a day. So we've timed this out on the leader side. It's really less than a minute a day that you have to interact with our solution. You spend more time on your phone looking at Facebook, whatever else, right? So we know that the friction point's pretty low there. What we're always conscious of is the influencer side of that. So an influencer and a leader can be both, by the way. You could be an influencer for one person and a leader for another person, or be a leader in the system as well. And so the fatigue that we're really watch isn't the nudge fatigue. It's the question of, did you do this behavior 1 to 5? Not from the leader perspective, because again, I'm motivated. It's my behavior. It's from the influencer perspective. And so in the back end, we're constantly looking at the fatigue for that. We have a new dashboard, data dashboard that we're designing right now, and it has the coolest feature. And the feature is the fatigue of your respondents and watching that so you can respond to that. So giving the leader the power to say, hey, I'm fatiguing them. I can take a pause or have a conversation. What would you like to see different? So we're really conscious of that side of this solution. But the feedback we've received from the influencer side has been so positive, and it's been all around. I love that my voice can be heard for my leaders' development in the moment. And so that 1 to 5 question doesn't seem to have much friction overall. But I think like every solution, there's the 10 or 15% that are the 10 and 15%. It's like doing a facilitation and you realize you're talking to really 80%, knowing the other 20% just are kind of like checked out, you know? And I don't mean to be mean about it. I taught for so long. I totally get it. And I've done facilitation. So I've been there.
I did have someone fall asleep once while I was facilitating. So I think
how is that possible? How is that possible? Yeah.
I was pretty surprised. James, what haven't we asked you that we should have? What's missing here? I know it's a dirty coaching question. Sorry.
No, probably, is this a goatee or a beard? And it's a beard. I think that's probably a really important thing to point out.
Okay. We can vote on that if you want, James.
Yeah, do you want to set up a poll, John? Yeah.
What do you think, goatee or beard? I'm trying to think of the questions that we get often. You know, one of them is, you know, depending how IECL approaches the partner, is, hey, can we put some training wheels on this and try a small sample group first, right? So we have a very structured 4-week pilot where we define KPIs, we define a plan for afterwards, a plan for launch, metrics in the middle, touch points, and that's designed for success. And so, you know, we just signed an agreement with a large US bank to run a pilot with 100 leaders. And so that's a big pilot, but what's important about that is that we've defined all those KPIs and everything ahead of time. So success has already been designed. So that's really important, but we like to do that in conjunction with our partners so that their success is embedded in our success and our success is embedded in their success as well.
For me,
a question. Sorry, no.
Yeah, no, one of the questions that's been plaguing or interesting or coaches have been curious about for the last, I don't know, decade or so is how you link technology to coaching without either one destroying each other. You know, how do you make sure that it's a balanced relationship? Because the world is becoming more virtual. We're not all sitting in a room somewhere doing this face to face. You know, this is how but also there is this beautiful human connection that happens in a one-on-one live thing. And I think that what you're talking about is an absolute enhancement of the one-on-one or the live learning that happens in one-to-many or the coaching that happens one-on-one. And they both complement each other so well that I feel like this is going to be a no-brainer. I'm excited that we've made the connection. Sorry, John, what were you going to say?
Well, actually, my question was quite similar. I mean, call me old-fashioned. Well, actually, people call me all sorts of things, but call me old-fashioned for this one. I'm curious about how this leads to an actual conversation. And, you know, obviously you're getting the data points and you can make sense of it. But I wonder, yeah, what's the ripple effect to a conversation, and what's the ripple effect to a better quality conversation as a result of the feedback? I'm wondering whether you've done that.
Yeah. So when you say conversation, are you referring to leader team dynamics?
Yeah, so I've given some feedback, or I'm a leader and I've got the data. Great, I know what my score is. I know what the score that you gave me.
Yeah.
How does that translate to? Oh, well, let's have a chat about this rather than let me just kind of exist in teams and source the data from there.
Yeah. So I think what's really important about our solution is that it's not misused, and there may be cases where this happens, but our belief is that at least the early adopters that use our solution, they're the ones that want to develop and grow and be better. They're the ones who want to have those conversations. And so the way that we see it is that if they get a suite of feedback, written feedback, because the quantitative is a bit nebulous, right? It's an aggregate score from perception, right? So you got 10 people in a meeting, everyone has a different story of what just happened in that meeting. We construct our memories totally different, but the written feedback is the interesting thing. And so an environment that's psychologically safe, a leader should be able to say, hey, I really appreciate this feedback. Here's what I heard. Are you guys feeling or hearing the same thing? And so this is where, you pull the old, Brene Brown and, hey, I'm going to be vulnerable right now. I want to be a better leader for you. And I think starting with the premise that I'm here to be almost like a servant leader, I want to have a better, richer conversation. This is what I've read and what I've heard. And I think it really is based on the framework of how you interpret the feedback, how you want to restate it back to the team, and that dynamic of trust that's in between the two.
Great, thanks. Like you say, it's all kind of based on the psychological safety, which of course is, underpins everything. There's one question that's just come in the last minute that we've got for this session from Sharon Phipps. Am I correct that the tech uses the subject matter of diary calendar items to determine what the appropriate nudge is? If so, how dependent is the nudge on the descriptive subject lines for those meetings?
Yeah, so really great question. And what's really important about this is that when we look at your calendar, we literally only looking at essentially four things. They are who's in the meeting. Are there influencers that you've asked to help you grow? We're looking at what's the subject line, and are you working on behaviors that match that subject line? And we're looking at time. And I think that's the major things that we're looking at. We're not looking at content. We're not looking at PDFs. We don't care about any of that stuff. And so the secret sauce is subject line to behavior type, and matching those two or truing those two as best as possible to ensure success. Is there an ideal number? So we think that the ratio of 1 leader to 8 influencers or more is the best ratio. We think the more the merrier. We think organizational size, that matters because larger organizations have a meeting structure. So, in an early stage startup, we just ping each other and have quick conversations left and right. So our solution is really based on people accepting a calendar invite so that we know who's going to be in that meeting, so that we can then send the appropriate nudge and feedback opportunity. So size, we say about 500 or more from an organizational size. They have norms that are in place around meetings at that point. One of the things that we can also help with, just totally random, is helping organizations better write subject lines, because that matters. Hey, grab a coffee might mean something in one organization versus the other, or saying strat session 101 295 772. I don't know what that means, right? So like just making things up versus having some nomenclature around the different subjects. And so there are 9 core meeting types, from planning to governance to team, things like that. So I kind of rambled a little there. Sorry, I was reading the questions on the side here. Is there an opt-in for feedback not being anonymous? So this is also a great question. And today, the way we solve this problem, and we had an early client do this, which was awesome, is that when a leader asked for written feedback, his team, in this example, wrote their name and the score they gave them in the first line. So they knew exactly who it came from and the score they had. And so it's a really simple way to kind of create that openness of an organization and have full transparency.
Okay, We've got to wrap up, right, John? Is it now? We're at time? Okay.
Yeah.
I love that pause.
Hang
It's
out,
just
but
like,
I
oh, there
want
we
to thank
go.
you for showing.
It's like she's practicing chi and karate at the same time.
Tell me when I'm here. Am I here?
You're
That's
good. You're good. You're good, Charity.
It's been perfect weather where I am for 10 days, and there's a thunderstorm coming that started half an hour ago and is going to go for the next 3 hours. So that's what's happening in my life. For anybody that wants to ask questions, you can contact me. You can contact our client development team. We really think that this partnership is going to bring what we do in the room that we know we do well. We get, incredibly high NPS scores into day-to-day life for people so that they can get the return on investment on their time, and so that organizations can get the return on investment of the investment that they're putting into it. I'm thrilled that you got to meet James, and thank you for showing up so early. Thank you for braving our time zone and my glitchy internet. But we can organize for your organizations. We're very happy to talk. I've never met anybody other than myself who's as enthusiastic about this stuff as James is. So, let us please reach out if there's more that you would like to hear on it. And James, from everyone here, thank you so much for your time. That was brilliant.
Thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Charity.